We're at a big turning point here with our Sermon on the Mount in chapter 7. We've had one as we left chapter 5 into 6, and we get into our second one here as we leave chapter 6 and get into chapter 7 and finish up with a couple of the final teachings that have some of the more famous sayings of this entire sermon series. So Jesus, right, has been exploring this kingdom idea, and so here in 7 he's going to explore the dynamics of what it means to be a community of his disciples that are actually helping each other grow and follow him together. There's no vision. Scott Conant is staring at me the whole time. He's very frightening. Hang on. Scott Conant is he's scaring me slightly. There we go. He's a scary person. What it means to be in this community, there's no vision that Jesus is saying we're going to do this whole sermon discipleship thing alone. Right? The vision of Christianity that we have in America, which my guy by the name of Tim Mackey, who runs the Bible Project, he says it's called Me, Jesus, and a Pickup Truck is American Christianity. Just you sitting in the driver's seat, he's picking out the music, and it's just the two of you cruising along on the highway, and there's nobody else involved. That's not the vision that Jesus has. No one's really welcome in that cab to give you opinions about how it's supposed to go. But that's not this picture that Jesus gives us. It's in fact quite the opposite. He envisions this kingdom where it's absolutely necessary to do this together. And when you do Christianity, when you do life with other people, it can get very complicated. It can get really complicated. Growing with another person can be very complicated. It's one of the things that you learn in the first year that you get married. It's complicated to do a life with somebody else who has their own opinions, ideas, and values. And so it can get complicated. To kind of set us up for this section, and once I say this, you'll know exactly what this is. Barna Research Group did a large survey of Christians and non-Christians in American public life. Tens of thousands of people that identify as Christians and those that don't identify as Christians. And they were asked all sorts of different questions. And one of the questions had a huge list of words, and they asked people who are not the Christians to pick the top 3 words that describe people who are. Can you guess the top 3? Can anyone take a hazard of what number 1 might be? Judgmental, number 1. We're on judgmental today at Matthew 7:1. So we've got number 1 is judgmental, right? Looking down on people that don't hold the same values. Number 2, hypocritical. Great. We don't actually live by those moral or religious values that we hold other people to. That's number 2. And number 3? Materialistic. No. Arrogant. No. Anti-homosexual was number 3. That was the number 3rd one. And so there's one specific group right there that we are targeted for being judgmental and hypocritical to, apparently. That's our top 3 words. So immediately, think about it in your head. I said judgmental, and we all did this, right? Who's being described by those tens of thousands non-Christians? And the first place that my mind goes to is towards some minority, small group of Christians, people that say they're Christians, and they go to public places and they have the sandwich board on them that says things like, repent or burn in hell, and they ring a bell at college campuses, or famously Westboro Baptist Church that pickets the funerals of soldiers, and that's right where my mind goes to when I think of it. These sandwich board picket sign Christians, they're not actually most of the Christians that I know, though. You know what I mean? That's where my mind goes. This is clearly a small amount of Christians that we're thinking about. It's a very small thing. But when I see that small group, the thing that happens inside of me, right? This minority of people that is representing Jesus to all these people, when I see them, and when I think about it, what I'm surprised is how I feel about the sandwich board, picket sign, bell ringing, campus judgmental Christian, right? And what happens is I judge those people really hard. I do. I look and I just go, if only, right? The reason I'm saying this is because Christians judge other Christians way more intensely than we do any other group. We are horrible to each other, especially people that disagree with us in terms of theology or in some practice. We eat each other alive. A major denomination in the United States, the UMC, just ate itself alive and split into 2 denominations because we are judgmental of other Christians harder than anybody else. We eat each other up. There's not 5 million denominations because we get along, right? So So Jesus knows this. This is the setup for this teaching section. He knows that there's something inside of humans that creates this posture of arrogance towards other people and an ignorance towards evaluating ourselves. But it's precisely these broken, screwed up people that he's trying to bring together in this kingdom message so that we can help each other grow past that. And so what that means is if you take broken people that are messy and judgmental and don't self-evaluate well, and you push them together, you're going to create a big mess and a lot of conflict. Because we judge each other way more harshly than we do anybody outside of our community. And so these words he's going to say are really important for us. And I want you to, we're going to go real slow through this today. And I want you to notice Jesus doesn't end this teaching in this way. He doesn't say, therefore, since we're really judgy people and it's whatever, don't bother having tough conversations with people. Just walk away if stuff gets difficult. That's not how he ends this teaching. It's actually this ending that encourages us to move towards each other only when we have done the self-evaluation and the self-examination. Because he knows it's going to be messy. He knows that we're judgmental. And if you don't think you're judgmental, just ask yourself how you think about and perceive people who you think are judgmental. Go ahead, think about it. Think about it. You're like, I'm not judgmental. Now think about how you feel about the person who you think is judgmental. And just like all of Jesus' great teachings, you just became them because you're judging the way that they are judgy. He forces everybody into this box. Jesus, what he's getting at here, he's not talking about judging in the sense of like looking at someone's behavior and weighing that decision in like a moral idea and saying, I think that's a wrong decision. That's not what he's getting at. We all do that. That's a human thing. That's just how humans act. He's talking about something much deeper and something that we do or think towards other that infects a relationship. And that's corrosive and that's destructive. And that's more what he's getting at here, right? We observe the behavior, we observe the appearance, we dehumanize that, which means we've already missed the whole lead up of the Sermon on the Mount at this point. So think about all of the don't murder. It's not just don't kill them, right? But don't even have anger. That dehumanizes them. Don't commit adultery, but also don't lust after them. It dehumanizes who they are. We've been talking about this dehumanization over and over. So he's not getting it. He's getting at this judging that dehumanizes the person. That the ways we don't love our neighbor in charitable ways. That's the whole lead up to this moment. So we see someone's behavior or appearance, and instead of recognizing the complexity they have as a human, instead of seeing them as a dignified image in creation, we strip away that complexity. We strip away all those things, and we define them by the choice or the behavior they've made, and that one we disagree with. We size them up, we push them into a category, and they are this kind of person. And this is what Jesus is getting at. He says, not in my kingdom, not with my disciples. That's not how we're going to operate in our group. So what does he mean exactly? Right? So what are the implications of this? This is what we're going to explore. What does he mean, and what are the implications of it? Because it's crucial. When you think about your day-to-day relationships with each other, how you invite people into your life, and work on those character flaws when we're making stupid decisions and we need to grow with each other. How are we going to do that? The moment you invite someone in, it gets complicated and it gets complex and difficult. So let's see what he has to say. Matthew 7:1. We're going to go pretty slow. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. I'm going to do the thing that I like to do. I'm going to teach you about words from dead languages because I'm a nerd. So the Greek word in Matthew's gospel for judge is a pretty common word, okay? It's a lot like our English word judge, and it has a pretty wide range of meaning, just like our word in English does. The word is krino. There you go. And it means to decide. Okay, you got two options in front of you, and you're surveying, you're evaluating, and you decide whichever one is superior, right? Chocolate versus vanilla ice cream, and we all know the best one is vanilla. Good, we're all on the same page. Especially like old-fashioned, where it's not like, it's like almost yellow, you know what I'm talking about? That's the better of the vanillas anyway. It's a decision, you with me? You're weighing two options, you're taking the benefits, like chocolate, sugar, delicious, tasty, vanilla, tastier, takes mix-ins better than chocolate, tastes better with chocolate sauce and caramel. This is clearly superior, right? This is what you're doing. You take your experience, you evaluate, and you choose. It's connected to another way that we use this concept in the word in English when we have a panel of people right? And they've got a whole bunch of pies in front of them. And their job there, they got to taste all these pies. And they work together to make the decision of which pie is the best. Oddly, the best job in the whole world. And those people, we would call them judges, right? Now, they didn't go to law school. I'm assuming you haven't taken a class about blueberry pie decision. Okay. Yeah, they haven't gone there. When someone's being called for expertise to survey pies, right? They agree which one is best. There's no anything else with it. But then you get to the other one, which is, of course, who sits in the county courthouse. It's the judge. Someone who's educated in this field. They understand the law. They understand the ideas of justice, how to interpret the law, and it's their job. They have a complex decision brought to them about people's decisions and people's behaviors, and they make determinations and they offer their judgment. Great. So many of us, we hear this word judge, and we think of something negative. We think superiority complex most of the time. We'll talk about that in a second, but it's not the way that we use that word in so many cases. It's just a word that describes having multiple options and picking one that's the best. This is how Matthew is using it. So Jesus says, don't judge. Is Jesus telling you to ditch your moral compass right here? Is he saying, forget your moral compass, don't use any critical thinking in significant moral decisions in your life? Is that what he's getting at? No, okay. That'd be absurd, because we've heard the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, right? If you've read the rest of this, if you've been following along, is there any way that you can deal with anger and lust and truthfulness and integrity and oath-keeping and how to love your neighbor if you aren't growing in your abilities to evaluate and make good decisions using your morality? No, you can't. So he's clearly not saying, don't do that. Because becoming a disciple of Jesus means growing in that ability to make those moral judgments, to discern between what's good and what's wrong. Right? And then even between what's good and what's best, right? The difference between don't murder and also don't be angry. That's good, but best. So we're getting better at evaluating our judgment. Let's continue what he says. 7:2. For in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So now he's talking about the way that you judge. Apparently, there is some ways that you could make a decision. You could have a conviction about someone, that they're doing something that you've evaluated and what you believe they're doing is wrong, and you make a judgment, and you think, that's right, their behavior is wrong. There's apparently a way in which it's fair to do that, and you can make that judgment. And if someone has judged you in that way, you think, yeah, that's fair. I really shouldn't have murdered that guy. I don't know. You with me? There's a fair way. Someone can judge it, and you can be like, that's completely fair. But then there's the other ways you do this to someone. Like, no, that's not what I meant when you're making an assumption about why I'm doing, you're filling in some sort of gaps, you're assuming a motive about me that I don't actually have, and it feels like you're being judged unfairly. Have you ever had people make assumptions about your character based on something that you did and you didn't mean it, right? But this is now how people perceive you. It sucks when people misunderstand you and attributes an ill motive to that thing. This is what Jesus is getting at here. Be careful of how you're bringing this decision to them. I really want to clarify Jesus, because when he says don't judge, we actually have a really helpful commentary within the New Testament itself. It's the letter of James. James, Jesus' brother, probably writes this. And what the book of James is, if you want to turn with me, is essentially a commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. James is writing a commentary over the Sermon on the Mount. There we go. About and clarifying some things that Jesus talks about in here. So if you'd like to turn to James 4, and we're gonna go right to it. James 4, 11 through 12. And he's going to work on clarifying this here. 11 through 12. Brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you're not keeping it, but you're sitting in judgment on it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor? So I want you to notice what James is saying in this commentary to help understand this judge a little bit, and what he's not saying. Okay, what he's not saying is anything about the other person. Did you catch that? He never was like, obviously the other person is wrong, right? He doesn't bring up, it's not about whether what they're doing is right or wrong. That's actually completely irrelevant to James's argument. They may be doing something completely wrong. The point, though, is how you perceive that and what you do in response to it. Okay, his focus isn't on them. When he uses the word judge, he's using the same word that Jesus did, but then he uses all these other words to clarify what Jesus is getting at. Did you pick them up? Did you see the behavior he's talking about? If you're slandering or speaking against, he's talking about you, the one doing the judging, right? You're observing this behavior and you make a judgment, a moral judgment about that behavior, but then you do one thing more. And you're filling in the assumptions about what they're doing. Why are they doing that? The assumptions about their character. And you're starting to categorize them at what kind of person would do what this person does. And then you take it even a step further because you start to advertise what you think about this person. You talk poorly about them. You look down on them. And when you talk about them, there's this like slant that he uses the word slander to describe. So you're speaking against them, and then even a step further. Okay, as Christians, we assume always that God agrees with us all the time. It's like we would never think of ourselves as doing this, but when we observe the things that people are doing, we observe this behavior, and in our minds, we make this one more step. We think we know them, we think we know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and we imagine that we're standing, and we got Jesus standing right beside us. You with me? And Jesus is in this, right? And Jesus goes, I know, it's so lame, right? Aren't they the worst? You know what I'm talking about? You and Jesus hanging out, and you're looking across at this other person. There's like this moral uprightness about it, that I understand how Jesus feels about everybody, and then I will treat people accordingly. We do this, especially to other Christians. And James says, right, there's so many things wrong with that. First of all, that's not our role. This is how he kind of wraps it up. When I do that, what I'm doing is I'm assuming a posture of God towards somebody else. And that's not appropriate. I'm assuming this posture that somehow it's me and Jesus and this person, a bunch of space, some sort of like line in the middle, and then this other person on the other side of it. It's a posture of distance. It's me, Jesus, big gap, a line, space, and them. And I might even think of myself as God's appointed committee to make it known about how awful this person is. Because I'm standing right here with him. And this fills us with these delusions about our own character. It's not the reality, right? In reality, in this scenario, I'm on the wrong side of the line. Because that's not really the reality. The reality is, Jesus is over there, a big gap, a line, and then there's me and the person I'm judging. I'm actually over here with them. And we're both looking across the way to Jesus. What the person is doing, it might be right, it might be wrong, but it's completely irrelevant. What James is focusing on is the inappropriateness of me and Jesus against this person. And that's what Jesus moves towards in this next famous parable that he gives. Wisdom about how to make sure we're not assuming this posture. And it's the brilliance of Jesus' teachings. He does it in a way that you are laughing at the ridiculousness of this scenario, this parable he's about to tell you. You're supposed to laugh. You're supposed to go, ha 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 ha, while he's punching you in the mouth, knocking your teeth out. You with me? You ready to hear it? You're supposed to laugh. It's supposed to be ridiculous. Matthew 7:3. You'll know this right away. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? When he says brother, fill in brother, sister, gender neutral term for another disciple in a community of disciples. Why do you look at another disciple's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own? He's going for a laugh here. He's going for a laugh. He's talking about, you have this my dad has a wood shop, right? And you'll use like a circular saw or something, and it'll spray sawdust in the air. And if you don't have your glasses on, you'll get that tiny speck that just kind of irritates a little bit. And if you looked, you'd never see it, but it's there. Like it itches, it's whatever. But you get this little speck in your eye, and he paints in this person's eye, and he paints this ridiculous picture of you on the other side with a telephone pole it's balancing out, and you're like trying to keep back. This is the picture. You got a telephone pole shooting out of your eyeball. This is the image you're supposed to conjure up in your head. You're supposed to laugh. You're supposed to go, ha ha, Jesus, you're so silly, right? The whole point is that it is as big as your head. The whole point is as big as your head. It's ridiculous. You're supposed to laugh. I think it's worth to sit about all the implications that this metaphor that Jesus uses points to. The whole point of this image, of the tiny speck of sawdust and a giant telephone pole that you're like trying to keep balanced, is this posture of delusion you have to have. That it's not really the reality that you're living in. If Jesus is going to move towards another disciple, notice here, what does the other disciple, do they actually have a speck in their eye? Says, when you look at a speck of sawdust in their eye, do they have a speck in their eye? Sure, absolutely, right? There's a speck in there. It's not a figment of your imagination. There's a speck in their eye that you've noticed. What he's saying is, you've got an issue. They're doing something stupid or selfish, whatever it is, it's happening. But before you even think about addressing it, you need to have done a whole bunch of work to get yourself in a kind of mindset so that encounter can become healing and helpful and not destructive. Because if you've got a big telephone pole sticking out of your eyeball, how do you think your vision is doing? Well, it's not good. Your vision's impaired. This is the first implication. You've got a big telephone pole in your eye. You can't see. This is intentional. It means that if you're a disciple, right, and I'm seeing someone else's behavior and I'm going to make a judgment on it, I think this behavior is destructive, right? I think it's going against the teaching of Jesus, right? The first thing Jesus wants you to assume is that your vision is impaired. You've got your own issues. You've got your own stuff. Your ability to see is messed up. So this is the first thing. He says, first of all, your vision is impaired. In which case, you need to evaluate yourself. Am I actually seeing this speck correctly? Because I need to assume I don't have the whole story. I can only see behavior. But humans are extremely complex. Motives are deep. The rationale for why we do the things that we do, it's very complex. And Jesus is saying, first of all, assume you don't have 20/20 vision. Assume you don't actually know all of the motives. And assume you don't actually have the whole story. It doesn't mean that their behavior is suddenly right. It might actually be wrong. But don't assume that you know the whole complex sea of factors that goes into this behavior first. The second implication, and this really takes us, I think, to the heart of Jesus' gospel, to the heart of this whole thing, is they actually have a speck, right? I should just always assume that my own pride and self-worth, my own insecurities, are more grievous than the person I'm looking at. We have a tendency to combine arrogance towards others and ignorance towards ourselves. They have a speck. You have a telephone pole. Right? You see what he's painting here? We exonerate ourselves because we know our motives for doing things. It's a big telephone pole, but if they understood, blah, 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 blah. We have none of that for the other person. And Jesus says, just assume that you've got your own issues and they are way more serious. It's not encouraging to self-loathing or self-hatred. He's pushing us to do what all disciples of Jesus should do. It's taking on a commitment of self-reflection, honest self-evaluation, instead of assuming you are in the position to do the condemnation. Assuming that we know what this person is about and what the things that they do are about. Jesus is saying, just assume, right? Just assume that movement would be inappropriate for you because you have big issues to deal with. That doesn't mean you never have a conversation. What it means is it forces you to go to the heart of the gospel. Change yourself first. You got to change from an experience. Because if it's not me, Jesus, a line, and a person with that line, right? If the reality is I'm on the other side of this line and Jesus is over there, how do I get to Jesus first to deal with this log in my eye? How on earth do I get this thing out? that's heavier than my whole body. How do I get it out of here? And it's actually super simple. Heart of the gospel, right? You come to Jesus. It's not, I'm over here with Jesus, right? I'm over here before Jesus. I'm in a disciple with a whole community of people. And by definition, to become that disciple of Jesus means acknowledging something about yourself. It means saying, acknowledging I'm the kind of person who's in desperate need of grace. And that only comes through Jesus. I've got a stinking telephone pole in my eyeball, right? I've got issues. I've got to come before Jesus. And I've listened to him talk. I've read the stories about how he treats people who have telephone poles in their eyes. And I look about how he lived his life for me, how he died, how he was raised for me. And Jesus is actually the only person who's qualified to take a telephone pole out of your eye. And this is what Jesus doesn't do, right? What he doesn't do. He doesn't condemn you for having a giant, massive telephone pole sticking out of your eyeball. It compromises my motives. It compromises my sight. It compromises my ability to see other people for who they really are, but I'm not condemned for it. Instead, we're given grace, life, death, and resurrection. And that experience to have a telephone pole, all these things pulled out and forgiven, it utterly changes a human. We've talked about this before. If you've been forgiven truly, it changes people. When we get here every Sunday, I don't know if you know this, when we come here every Sunday, we're actually telling that story together, every time. So just imagine with me a scenario where you come in on a Sunday morning, and you're at church, and you come in and you've got your secrets, right? You've got your logs in your eyeballs, you've got the specks, everything in between, and some of those specks, people sitting by you might know what they are. Ashley in here probably knows a couple specks I've got in my eye. Maybe even a couple logs, right? But there may be a few she doesn't know about. Probably the most significant things are the ones that you're most ashamed for anybody to know exist. So just imagine a scenario where you come in, and as you sit down, the announcement slide is scrolling your picture, and beside it, it has those things written on it, and everyone in here gets to know what they are. Just picture it for a second. The exit's over there if you want to run quickly, right? So it would be mortifying. Think about you're guarding your self-worth and it's suddenly at stake. It's exposed. All the truths about the character I'm not proud of would go public. Everyone would know who I really am, and I would run to the exit as fast as my picture first showed up. But here's the reality that we reenact every Sunday when we come in here, that we celebrate every time we're here. That Jesus invites us based off of all these things that he says would happen when we gather here. We're gathered at this moment, we walk in, and all of our secrets, those specks, those logs, those things that are deep down are already known. They're already known. Your nightmares are already known. You read the stories about Jesus, and they would come up to him with questions or petitions, some request. They would try to challenge him, and there would be a crisis, and Jesus would like read their minds or something. He knew what was about to happen. He knows everything that's going on inside of them. This is the Jesus we encounter. This is the Jesus that's present here. Some people might say Jesus knowing all those things is a nightmare. I call it a dream. Because the reality is, if I really believe in Jesus, and if we're really disciples, and we're really gathered here, then all of those things are already known by the only thing it matters to. Every single time we gather, this confession is in the hope of Jesus is the one that's totally transparent, totally knows me, and he's actually the only one who's qualified to do something about that behavior. The only people that Jesus actually leaned into and pushed and pressed on were the other extremely judgmental religious people. But the people who come to him open-hearted with their crisis, with big logs in their eyes, with this need, the absolute grace and passion. And this is good news for people like you and me. This is good news. So here's what's going to happen as we kind of wrap up this series. We're not done. I told you this is we're going to get there. But here's how we're going to end. This is what's going to happen. Everyone, keep this in your mind. There's this thing over here called the table, and there's bread and there's juice on it, right? When we come over here at the end of this, you'll step up and you're going to get some bread and some juice. And what you're doing, this is a really big advertisement. I don't know if you know this. It's a big advertisement to every other person in the room. Because we're not just sitting here attending. You're participating in an announcement every single week. In reality, when you gather and you stand up, you're saying, I'm a disciple of Jesus. I'm moving towards Jesus and what he did for me. His life was lived for me. His body was broken, his blood shed, and his death for me. And in the hope of the resurrection, that life was given to me. When you stand up and you come up to the table, you're making an announcement to everybody and you're saying, I need this. I've got a big beam in my eyeball. I need this. I need somebody else's life to count for mine because I've blown it. And I've got big issues, and my hope is that this man who was God came and called me and created, and he did what I failed to do. And out of utter mercy and grace, Jesus offers the life and death and resurrection for me. That's the announcement you make. I've got a pull, I screwed up. Thankfully, grace exists. I'm incapable of dealing with this pull, but Jesus is capable. This is the announcement. This is the truth that we say when we come up and we take the bread and the cup. We announce that truth every single week, that Jesus knows our secrets. But we face grace and truth and forgiveness. And that reality denies a fact. To ever think I sit on this side of the line with Jesus. It's never me, Jesus, against somebody else. But the posture of the gospel puts us, you and me and disciples, we look to Jesus as the one who meets us in the dark brokenness. And when I allow Jesus to deal with the telephone pole in my eye, that changes a human being. The presence and the power of that grace changes deep down. And it changes the dynamic within a community of Jesus' disciples. Because all of a sudden, an environment is created where we're not against each other, but we're with each other. So notice in this parable that Jesus doesn't end with both people just like walking away, never having a difficult conversation about specks and poles. But rather this changed environment, a community where it creates space for these difficult conversations to have with each other. Because the most difficult word has already been said. I have secrets, and they're already known by Jesus. So we're all going to get up in a little bit, and we're going to go to those tables. But the most difficult thing has been said. There's nothing that someone can say to me. There's nobody, another disciple, that hasn't already been said by the fact that I need Jesus every week. And that creates space for grace, for tough conversations. And when you have tough conversation, it's messy, complex, but it's the way forward. If your neighbor needs to deal with the speck, you need to deal with the log in your eye with Jesus first. Which leads us to the next thing that Jesus has said that's puzzled people for 2,000 plus years. Matthew 7:6. Very strange. This is how he ends it. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Now, hang on a minute, Phil. I thought Jesus just said, don't judge people, but now they're dogs and pigs. What's this about? There's probably about 8,000 different views on what Jesus means here. So I'm going to share with you the one that I think is right. I could be wrong. Everyone say, Phil. I could be wrong. Say it. Yeah, I could be wrong. I don't think I am. But I could be, okay? This is what I think. I think this is another little parable. I think we've got a similar meaning to this first parable about the speck and the log. The problem is we want to read this like an allegory, not a parable, okay? And an allegory, everything has a symbol. Everything means something, and sometimes Jesus teaches with allegories. And most often, though, he teaches with parables. Parables are little short stories that have a main point, and that's what you take away from it. But we get ourselves in trouble when we start going into allegories. We go, what does a pig mean? What is a pearl? Right? No, the point is to get the point. The point is to understand the point. You've got somebody who's got something of great value, and they're super stoked about it. And this beautiful thing that is so valuable to them, they want to share it with anybody and with everybody, and there will come situations where they're before someone who doesn't value that thing. So you have a pig. What does a pig value? What does a pig value? Do they value pearls? Right? No. It ends up trampled in the mud. We've got dog people in here. Dog people, what's your dog want? Food, treats. Does a dog care if you dropped a pearl necklace? No, wouldn't care at all. This is about a disconnect between what you value and what these other things value. And it's really similar to judging. I can misjudge a situation. I can barge in like I'm telling you exactly what I think about what you're doing. It's totally inappropriate. But here's another little parable about something I value that's precious to me, but it's not perceived as valuable by the other person. So you barge in and you're like, hey, don't you do this. And you're not respecting the beauty of the thing that you hold so precious. But even more, you might actually provoke an opposite reaction, and what you value gets trampled underfoot. That's what I think this is about. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I don't think I am. Right? What it means is that Jesus is encouraging wisdom for how we engage with other people. Wisdom for how you love your neighbor as yourself. How would I want to be addressed in this situation? And it might be that it's okay to come out guns blazing with some people. But I think that's not going to accomplish what we wanted to accomplish with everyone. So take a different tactic. Change how you address the situation. Otherwise, you risk provoking that hostility, where the exact opposite of the thing you want is what's accomplished. I don't think that the problem, in the most part, for the Christian church today is that we're having these conversations too many times. I don't think that's the church's problem. I don't think we're having too many difficult conversations in the church. I think it's the opposite. I think we crawl under the shade of verse 1. Jesus said, "Don't judge," so I guess I'll just never say anything ever. When we actually misunderstand what Jesus is saying. Because if I want to become someone who's healed by the gospel, I actually have to become a vehicle for the grace and meet someone. Truth requires a bridge. This is how we're going to wrap up. We'll take communion. Truth requires a bridge. If you have this very profound truth, this knowledge about the speck in someone's eye, if you've got this pearl that you want to share with them, it takes profound truth to how to address a specific part of that life for someone. And it's a really heavy payload to take to them. And that requires a relationship, a relational bridge that's strong enough to carry it. I got to trust the person's credibility, their intentions, and their motives. That truth to bring it to them requires a bridge, a relationship. And the heavier the payload you're bringing to them, the stronger the bridge needs to be. The problem is that we take ridiculous truckloads of Jesus' truth and we make a little rope bridge with someone and we try to cross it. It's, you know, the ones, it's like got two pieces of rope and there's a rope here and you got to like balance like this on it. We try to take truckloads of Jesus' truths to relationships that are balanced on a rope's edge. And that's mess all over the place. I'm a Christian today because somebody I cared about pointed out a speck, maybe even a log in my eye. And I think for many of us, that's the most difficult conversation with the people that we know and love and care about, that end up making the most difference in our own lives. It takes a lot of effort and grace and wisdom, which is what Jesus is talking about. But we need each other absolutely. It's precisely the blind spots in our lives that we can't see, which is why we need other people so desperately. So we're going to come up here, we're going to sing our last song as we take communion, and we're going to have this sense of meaning and significance to think about those people in our lives that you're building relational bridges with. And if you don't have those people, start to pray about how you would find them and take that initiative to strengthen that bridge, to take those payloads of Jesus' truth after you have done the payload, after you have unloaded on Jesus yourself. Let's pray. We'll come up to communion and sing our last song. God.